let's take 7 league boots here, the way Hegel uses that term, to move quickly through the centuries as we move towards the Renaissance. It's very easy to talk about the Middle Ages as being like, you often hear it like the Dark Ages, as if the Dark Ages went right up to like Galileo or something like that. The period between approximately 1000 or 1100 up to 1400, the so-called High Middle Ages, was a period in which probably the most powerful engine for forging a critical rational intelligence was instituted on a large scale as has ever happened in human history up to that time. And it makes possible the modern mind among the scholastics, the universities. And of course the paragon of that development is Thomas Aquinas, who one fine medieval a scholasticism scholar, I think it was Chenu, says that Aquinas was like, he bent the bow of the Odyssean bow of faith and reason, and in particular the Christian gospel and the Greek philosophers, especially Aristotle, but Plato, Plotinus as well. And he with kind of superhuman strength, he strung the bow. And to carry that metaphor further, I mean, it's on that bow that the arrow flies of the modern mind, and it comes out of that incredible synthesis that he pulls off. And of course, the medieval sensibility is gestating things left and right in the troubadour tradition, in Dante, in the cathedrals, in the guilds and the cities and the technological breakthroughs. And then after the great crisis of the Black Death in the late medieval period, you have this incredible Renaissance, rebirth amidst the decay and violence of the 15th and 16th centuries. And in this amazing period, you basically have like one generation between, like basically exactly 500 years ago. You have, in a very short period, you have Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael are sculpting and painting their masterpieces, and you've got the printing press is spreading literacy into a civilization as never before, with its shifting of and forging of a kind of individualistic, reflective consciousness, and you have the global explorers and imperialist conquistadors moving out into the world and beginning what Edgar Morin and Sean Kelly have called the planetary era, where the planet is opened up to itself so that the inhabitants of all the continents are now, not only human, are in more intimate communication and interaction than ever before. Columbus sails and reaches America. Vasco da Gama sails east and reaches India. The Magellan expedition circumnavigates the entire globe. And at the same time this is happening, Martin Luther posts the 95 Theses on the church door at Wittenberg and initiates this cataclysmic transformation of Western religion, which was the European mindset, tremendous consequences as he splits it open and represents the human self right in direct engagement with a powerful vision of deity without any more of the mediating structures and rituals and sacramental Virgin Mary and all the saints and relics and sacraments. All this is just transformed, and instead there's a profound new human sensibility vis-a-vis the transcendent. And at the same moment that's happening, and literally this is happening in almost simultaneously, the same months that Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling with God creating Adam, Martin Luther's having that experience of breakthrough that leads to the Reformation, and Copernicus hypothesizes the heliocentric theory and starts the scientific revolution. It was all like right about 1513, 1512, 1514, right within a few months of each other, those particular events. But that entire sequence of things that I was talking about, from Leonardo through the global expeditions and Copernicus and Luther, all that's happening in less time than has transpired since the moon landing and Woodstock. I mean, it's just like a single generation. And that was, in some sense, the birthing of the modern self. It was starting to crown at that point. Crowning in a childbirth where the baby's head just starts being seen coming out. You could say that was the moment, and then it just after that it comes to a tremendous force and rich complexity in Shakespeare's plays, in Descartes' Cogito ergo sum, and then as the modern mind reaches a kind of apotheosis of cosmological understanding with Newton, that famous summary from Alexander Pope where he says that nature was, that's in, it's somewhere in here, but let's see, always hid in let's see, I think this is worth getting, unless somebody's got Cosmos and Psyche where I know where it is in the beginning, but this one is a little more towards the Newton stage.
Here we go.
Thank you. I usually come down with these two things, but jet lag. Okay, so this is Alexander Pope, the kind of poet, philosopher of the Enlightenment. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light. Okay, that's a new Genesis. That's like a new biblical testament has been written, and it's a kind of rebirth that has taken place. And in this rapid overlapping sequence, you have the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, stabilized, ratified, systematized in the Enlightenment. The scientific and democratic revolutions explode out of that matrix, and then you basically have the compensatory movement that I described earlier of Romanticism coming to fill in what the rationalist Enlightenment was leaving out. And that dialectic of inner and outer, of Romanticism and Enlightenment, of poetry and prose, there's a lot of ways of suggesting this dialectic, is at work in all of us. And that was certainly one of that tension is certainly one of the factors that goes into the emergence of postmodernity, in which and William James is certainly carrying both. Nietzsche is carrying both. And in some ways you could say James and Nietzsche are two extremely different sensibilities, but they're two prophets of the postmodern. One American and the other European. One so American in certain ways, the other so Germanic, European, but both equally relevant to the postmodern sensibility. I think there's probably hardly any thinker, writer today that's more valorized in academic culture than Nietzsche in certain ways right now, as a kind of prophet of the era, of the zeitgeist. And he predicted so much of what's happening today. He said there was going to be a catastrophe that would come through the 20th century as the consequences of the death of God registered, as the basic destruction of the metaphysical world that had held in place Western morality for 2,000 years was pulled out from under it, as there was going to be a cataclysm. And he envisioned something that could happen past that, an emergence of divinity within the human being that could be a fulfillment of this great death. But he also lived with this great, and this is in certain ways the consequence of his the endarkenment of the cosmos that he was living within. That's a kind of Heideggerian phrase, endarkenment of the cosmos. That endarkenment that Nietzsche was living within, at the same time he's feeling this incredible birth happening within him, divine birth. He didn't have a thou for his I to relate to in terms of an I-thou. It was all I. He didn't have anybody to talk to, and so that's why his writings are so, the magnitude of them is so, from the top of the mountain kind of yelling. And biographically, he lost the one great romantic partner that he thought was his destined, Ruth Salome, and it was out of that crushing defeat that the great rhapsodic birth of Thus Spoke Zarathustra took place. But the shadow side of that birth that lacked an adequate sense of the supporting anima mundi, the soul of the world, helped precipitate an inflation, and of course there's all the other factors that were at work in his medical condition and so forth. This isn't a Nietzsche course, but you can see how he's a kind of, there's ways in which you can see how certain figures are paradigm figures for the age that is to come. And those figures often go through a trial and judgment and crucifixion or execution or judgment that is crucial to the initiation of the next age. So it was Socrates being put on trial and taking the hemlock and the birth of Greek, the Western philosophical tradition in many ways comes out of that moment. And then there's Jesus judged and crucified, and out of that comes the birth of Christianity, and that shapes the West so profoundly from then on.